Welcome to Third Floor Views, a production of Chesapeake Family Life, where we talk about health, education, and living with kids. I'm your host, Janet Jefferson. Today, we are talking about homework survival. So it's back to school. We're all getting into the swing of things again. So this is a great topic to talk about right now. And joining us today is Dr. Rebecca Jackson, VP of Programs and Outcomes and Board Certified Cognitive Specialist for Brain Balance. We'll be talking about strategies to use to understand what your child's homework behaviors are telling you, and then tips for how to deal with those challenges. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Jackson.
Yeah, thanks, Janet. Happy to be here.
To our viewers, if you have any questions or comments, just throw them in the comment section and we will get to those as we can. Dr. Jackson, let's get started. So why is homework such a point of contention? What's going on?
There's so much to unpack just in that one question. I think first and foremost, it's important to keep in mind that our kids are in school all day long, and sitting actually requires a ton of attention. Our kids' bodies at a young age are developmentally designed to move. So when we're asking them to hold still, sit still, control your body, pay attention, remember information, it's burning a tremendous amount of their resources in order for them to do that. So we've asked them to sit still, behave, pay attention, cooperate all day. And then we come home and we ask them to do more on top of that. It's like us having to work after dinner after working all day long. We can do it, but you've got to dig a little deeper in order to get through it. So always keeping in mind that when we're asking kids to sit down and do work after work, it's a lot.
So with that, and this might be a little bit of a controversial question, but where do we stand on homework right now? What is the best practice for homework in general? Is it useful? Is it a worthwhile pursuit? And then how much of this is age dependent? And what should parents really be, at what point should parents be making a stink about this?
Yeah. And, I want to answer that question carefully because I always want to be so respectful of our teachers out there. When I look at things, I'm looking at things through the window of development. And so when I'm thinking about homework from the perspective of developing a healthy, functional brain and body, what we know about development is our brain grows and develops through sensory stimulation and through our muscles and movement. So our kids' brain develops and grows and enhances over time, not through sitting still and memorizing information, but through movement and interaction. So I absolutely believe that the more time our kids can spend moving, running, playing, even as our kids get older, just being physically active and engaged with social interactions, and through a computer doesn't engage the brain the same way as it does in person. That's tremendously important to the development and well-being of their brain. There's a time and place for homework. If your child is not keeping up with a concept in the classroom and that work needs to be reinforced, that's a great time in a quiet, calm environment to reinforce a concept or to help a child grasp something that they were struggling with. So from my perspective, developmentally, the younger a child is, ideally, the less homework they have. Now, there's also something to be setting up routines and rituals and structure. And so certainly there's no harm in asking a small child, a younger child, to sit down after dinner or after school and do a few minutes of something. But again, my ideal world, the young child's homework might be do this task for 5 minutes. And then maybe your homework assignment is to go outside and find, leaves of 5 different colors, or a homework assignment that is getting them outdoors, getting them moving, getting them engaging. So definitely the younger they are from the developmental perspective, the less time is spent on that. And research is showing reiterating things, practicing isn't always the best way to learn things. Is if you're needing to reinforce the same concept over and over and over again, maybe that brain isn't developmentally ready for what it is that you're teaching. So again, from the developmental lens, I like to take a step back, move, grow, develop, and engage the brain that way so the brain is more ready and able to learn and memorize and retain the content.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. What are some specific common challenges with doing homework? And developmentally, why are those challenges happening?
I feel like, Janet, there's like 3 questions within each of these. There's so we could spend a half hour in each one of the questions that we've started with here. When we think about development perspective, again, and I'll stop saying that word over and over, but it's important to keep in mind that our kids' attention develops with their brain and body, which is why circle time in preschool is very short and it's interactive and it's singing songs, and then we move on to something else. So naturally, as our brain and body develops, so does our attention span. So the challenge that we run into as parents is it's so easy to look at our kids and assume that because you're 10 years of age, that it's fair for me to have age expectations of a 10-year-old. But not all kids' brain development develops at the same rate and pace as their biological age. So when you look at ADHD, for example, what we know about the brain is a child with ADHD have parts of their brain functions that are functioning 30% behind age appropriate, which means I've got a 10-year-old sitting in front of me who might actually function like a 7-year-old in some areas and like a 10-year-old in others. But the line that we say as parents all the time is, come on, you're 10, you should be able to remember to turn in the homework that you finished. You should remember to grab your shoes before you walk out the door for school. Like, how does this happen? So we tend to hold our expectations and set our expectations for kids based off of their age, not their development. So things to watch for in your child. And, we always say, well, we don't want to compare our kids to others, but at the same time, there is an opportunity to do it a little bit to say, okay, when everybody else is lining up and doing this and my kid's doing that, that's what age appropriate behavior looks like. So there can be red flags that you see in social interactions, in learning content. So again, if we go back to the example of the 10-year-old with ADHD, it doesn't mean that child isn't brilliant. But if I put a 7-year-old in a 5th grade classroom and ask them to perform, what is that going to look like? Right. Is again, that 7-year-old brain might be absolutely brilliant, but if I'm asking a 7-year-old to learn 5th grade content, it's going to take more repetition for it to stick. I might have to redirect that 7-year-old behavior to stay on task a little bit more. Buddy, hold still. Buddy, stay in your seat. I keep saying buddy, it can be girls as well. Girls can be buddies too. And you can see differences in social interactions. And so understanding personal space and boundaries, knowing when enough's enough. So when we think about it from the homework perspective, if you're seeing that your child is spending more time than other kids in the class, and if you're not sure, ask the teacher, what's your expectation with this homework? Should this be taking 20 minutes a couple times a week? Find out from the teacher what those expectations are. Find out how long it's taking other kids to get through that material so that you're getting a sense of, are you falling within that window of expectation? And then also watch that attention span for your child. There's going to be a productive window, and then things are going to start to unravel and fall apart. And so if you see that you could be productive for 20 minutes and then it's, wiggly all over the place and you're, things build and escalate and it becomes less and less fun than it was to begin with. Learn those windows of time and then know to give breaks in between, because that's going to show you your child's developmental attentional abilities rather than what you think it should be for a 10-year-old, for a 17-year-old, for any age.
That's really helpful. How much should parents actually be helping on homework? And obviously, again, this is going to be based on age and development. But do you think it really makes sense for parents to be there and helping all the time? Or is this something that it's like, nope, hands off, this is something that you're supposed to be doing on your own?
I've struggled with that as a parent is, we take a step back and our ultimate goal is we want to raise productive, independent members of society that can function on their own. And one of the challenges that I've seen, when I think back to some college kids that we've worked with over the years, we've seen an evolution in parenting and in autonomy and independence of the kids. With technology, we've got constant interaction and constant connectivity. And I'm watching parents get overly involved, and it comes from a good place. But when I think back years ago to when I was in college, my mom wasn't texting me throughout the day to say, did you get your paper done? Did you get it turned in? How did that quiz go? Did you make it to class? And that's what's happening today. And it's not coming from a bad place, but at some point, parents shouldn't be texting you to say, did you get out of bed? Did you make it to work? Did you turn in your project on time for work? And so, going all the way back to kindergarten, how do we start to set our kids up to be independent, productive members of society, but giving them the appropriate scaffolding and support to have them win along the way and to develop those skills and abilities. So from the homework perspective, I started way too hands off because I was so, I want you to be independent. This is your work. But there's times where they didn't get the instructions, and so they need help with it. And so having a little bit of touch point and touch checking in, and the need to check in is going to vary on the child. When I look at my own two kids, great kids, we all have our areas of strength and areas where we need additional support. And so it's learning what it is that they need to set them up for success. My son is able to be extremely independent in all of this, but he values my feedback and he values me knowing what's on. And so for him, I probably, check in once a week. Realistically, I mean to do it a couple more times a week than that, but just to say, hey, I saw you got that in. That's great. Here's what you have coming up. So for him, I'm able to have that level. My daughter, we do find that daily check-ins are more effective and helpful just to help that organization in middle school. 13, lots of distractions that go along with 13. And being in after school sports and all the things. And so we find having that daily, here's what you've got coming up tomorrow. Did this get turned in today? Did it get turned in the right way? Because now some things we submit online, some things we're turning in person. It's all the different things.
Right.
Then when you think about the help itself, ultimately, we want to know that the kids are grasping the concept so they can move on. So if you're having to do the work for them, that's not helping them be ready for the next stage and step. So if, again, math is an area that in periods of time, my kids have needed a little bit more support. And so sitting with them while they do it has allowed me to see where they're struggling, so we can press pause, do a couple extra, let me re-explain this, and then let's do a couple extra sample problems so that you can continue on. I love having the kids do homework where I can keep an eye on things, even at 11 and 13, because there's a lot of distractions. They have tablets for school, and those tablets can provide all sorts of avenues of things that aren't math related.
Right.
And so if they're doing their homework in a way where I can keep an eye on them as I'm doing some work or prepping dinner, then I'm there to answer questions if they have them, but not doing the work for them.
At what point would you, or have you, engage teachers in this conversation, whether it be for your students or your clients? When should parents be thinking about, hey, I'm struggling at home, I really need to loop the teacher in? And at what point, is that a productive conversation? What are the things that you're recommending that parents know and say, like, yes, you should definitely talk to the teacher about this, or like, some of these things that aren't such a big deal, you're okay to just figure it out?
Absolutely. Nobody can be the expert in all things. And so first and foremost, you are your child's advocate. Nobody is going to advocate for your child the way you will. Your teacher, no matter how wonderful they are, they're responsible for so much. And these last 2 years, responsible for more now than ever. And so we can't just simply sit back and wait for the teacher to say, hey, they're falling behind. Hey, this is standing out as different and needing help and support. There's just so much on their plates. And so to be communicative in a helpful way, not overly bombarding the teachers, but it's your child. If you've got questions, concerns, speak up. If you're not sure, ask questions. Allow the teacher to be the specialist in what they do to say, here's what I'm seeing at home. And, when we think about, there's so much we can learn from observing our child. So when we think about when their challenge points are with their work, when do you start to see that behavior escalate or shut down? Start paying attention. I'll use my son again as an example. Drew school comes very naturally for him. But in the math curriculum that he's in, there tends to be a time where things take a huge leap forward. They teach a ton of new concepts, and then it goes back and reinforces. So there's always this like surge and then review and surge and review. And we hit a time with Drew where we were getting some really unpleasant, not fun behaviors around math homework every night, to the point where my husband and I was like, who's drawn the short straw to homework oversight for the night. And it was just so out of character for Drew. And what we realized watching him is he hadn't gotten to a point in school where things had gotten hard for him. He didn't know how to handle it when it got hard. And when I had that aha moment, then we were like, yes, you've got to be able to have hard things, figure out how to dig deep, get through it, because A, that's just life. And B, if it hasn't gotten hard, then we're not challenging you enough. And we need to deal with that too. So for Drew, what we saw was he didn't know how to handle it when it didn't come naturally, when he had to work a little bit harder at it. And that was aha moment that we've been able to apply to a lot of areas of his life. When you're seeing your child, if there's just more repetition needed. So some just quick red flags. We all don't have the same memory capabilities, and there's so many different aspects to memory. There's what you remember, how much you can remember at a time, how you retrieve it. Memory is this very nuanced, interesting thing that all aspects of memory have to come and work together to be successful. So if you have a child that's needing more repetition in order to get things to stick, this can be a red flag that maybe some aspects of memory are problematic. And it's easy to look at things and say, oh, my child can memorize license plates. Why can he do that? Or he can tell me directions on how to get to the park, but he can't memorize 7 times 6. Like, how many times do we have to go over this? Again, there's different nuances to memory. So maybe visual memory, when there's visual cues, is fantastic, but that, getting short-term memory to long-term so you can retrieve it, even though you haven't been reviewing it constantly, those are different things. And so it's easy as a parent to say he can do directions to the park, so memory's great. What's the deal with math? But so if you see something like that, that's a red flag that maybe a part of an aspect of memory is immature, making things harder for that child than what it needs to be. And that's where, with what we do at Brain Balance, is looking to see what parts of the brain need to be strengthened and what can we do to improve those areas of the brain so that memory clicks and sticks and you're not having to reiterate things as much. We can also see where, maybe a child is excellent at memorizing information, but struggles with the big picture, struggles being able to apply that information. And so we've got kids that struggle with, comprehension versus memory. So there's all these different nuances. And then there's attention and focus. If you're paying attention, maybe they do great, but if attention fatigues, it doesn't matter how great memory is, you can't remember what you weren't paying attention to.
Right.
So, again, so multifaceted, but watching your child to start to figure out some of those nuances. If you have concerns, reach out to the teacher, see what they're seeing so that you can have a collaboration and conversation to figure out what are the best steps to support your child in their learning going forward.
That's really helpful. I think that's good a good reminder for parents to see, okay, here we are. And I think now it's time to have that open communication and have that support and really think of the parent, the child, and the teacher as a team working together to move the child forward. Let's talk a little bit about some of the sort of common things that don't go well at home when it comes time for homework. So what would you do, or what would you recommend a parent do if you were dealing with, say, procrastination, and if you have a kid who's a classic procrastinator?
I think first we want to take a step back to say, okay, why do we procrastinate in the first place? And usually we're procrastinating because we're avoiding something that either we're not good at, we don't want to do, or that we don't have the energy and reserves to do in the moment. So if you think about yourself, my energy on a Saturday morning that's when I'm going to clean the house. I'm going to get up. I'm going to get so much done. I'm waking up refreshed. That's my get it done energy. And versus, Friday night at the end of a long week, if you ask me, hey, we're working on this article, can you quick do that right now? I'm going to, if my choices on a Friday night were work on an article, clean the kitchen, or lay on the couch and watch a show, I'm going to default to the thing that requires the least amount of resources.
Right.
And so when we're thinking about procrastination with our kids, sometimes it's their way of saying, look, I just don't have the resource for this right now.
Hmm.
Or that what you're asking me to do, I don't understand. I don't feel good and successful at. So I'm going to do everything I can to get out of doing the thing that's hard and uncomfortable. Now we laugh because we all procrastinate, right? We know it's a thing. We know it impacts us. We know, things only get more stressful, not less. But when it comes to setting our kids up for success with this, when you're asking them to do something that is hard, math homework for Drew, when it's in that period of surging forward, I need to make sure that he's not hungry. A brain that has crashed with fuel has a hard time paying attention and working. So picture that hangry moment when you're so hangry, and your husband saying, where do you want to eat? You can't even think or make a decision in that moment.
Right.
That's not the moment to ask your kids to sit down and work on something that's hard.
Right.
But we have our to-do list of, I want to get through homework before dinner, so let's knock this out. Something as simple as a protein snack 20 to 30 minutes before you're asking your child to sit down and focus. And I keep saying your child, before you ask your 17-year-old to do, any age, before you yourself sit down to write an article. Protein 20 to 30 minutes before can help. Protein is a slow burning fuel source that can really help keep things even keeled versus sugar we burn through really fast and then we crash. Thus the hangry. And so making sure that you've got the fuel reserves in order to do it. Being well rested is such a simple thing that's critical. When you look at cognition studies, too much sleep is as harmful as too little sleep, and differences in sleep impact our memory, our attention, all the things that we need to sit down and work and focus. So making sure that your child's well rested, has the protein sources. And again, if it's something harder, maybe you're a little bit closer to keep an eye on things. And then doing goals. So, hey, I know this is really tough. I know this isn't fun. 20 minutes. Let's give this 20 minutes and then we're going to take a break. And one of the simplest things that we naturally gravitate towards as adults is movement. When we hit that point of zoning out, not productive, that's when we get up and get a drink of water when we work from home or wander to the mailbox. Allowing our kids to move, and especially spiking heart rate and engaging the muscles, can help re-engage the brain. So putting in a snack and some physical activity before we ask them to once again sit down and focus can be a really simple but powerful trick to help create a productive time slot for work.
What would you do or recommend for like a big meltdown or shutdown?
Yeah, it's going to happen, right? We have to understand what's happening in the brain when that happens. When we hit that point of meltdown or shutdown, and again, a meltdown can happen at any age. It just looks different at different ages. It happens to adults too. When we're calm and focused, our executive function area of the brain is kicked in, helping us think, helping us strategize, make decisions, plan. When we get into that moment where we're so upset, that's when we lose all inhibition and control. That's why people say things that they would normally never say when they're in that, I'm so angry, I'm so frustrated, I'm so upset. Brain drops out of executive function mode and drops into survival mode. When we're in that lower functioning brain area, the brain can only think in few second increments. So I can't plan ahead. I can't reason. I can't rationalize. So you have lost all opportunity for productivity when you've hit that point. So give up for the moment. And that's not the time to have a conversation about why did you do this? Why are you behaving this way? It's not even the time to threaten. There's no thought or action happening then. And it can take the brain anywhere from 20 to 45 minutes to reset. So taking a pause, you know what? I hear you. I see this right now. Let's take a moment. Let's regroup. And as parents, we always want to come over that, right? Our child starts to get loud and escalate. And so then we get loud and we're in their face and it just escalates from there. That loud and aggressive is only going to push them into that shutdown mode faster. It's the hardest thing to do, but trying to come under them, not over them in that moment where things are on the brink and it could go either way. And so doing things like getting really quiet to grab their attention. Hey, let's just take a minute and breathe. So if you can, as you see it start to escalate, if you can press pause, regroup, hey, let's take a snack. Let's just breathe for a minute. Let's grab a glass of water. You can maybe keep it from going over that threshold. Once you've reached the point of no return, you really do need to give it 20 to 45 minutes to allow the brain to calm down and reset so we can switch back into thinking, focusing, and memory mode.
That's really helpful. Probably
Easier said than
for
done.
all ages. That's true. That's true.
It is.
That is true.
I mean, we could turn this same conversation into a marital counseling session,
absolutely.
right? Like, don't have the conversation, then press pause, revisit.
Some other common things. What would you recommend for a kid who is a perfectionist and is really struggling with completing an assignment because it's not perfect?
Yeah. There's good things and challenges that go along with being a perfectionist. The perfectionist is really going to hold themselves to a high standard, and which can be really, really good. But what we can see is there can also be some feelings of shame if they're not living up to that expectation. So we can see that individual who's a perfectionist not turning in work because they don't feel like it was as good as what it should be. So the kid that finishes the homework, it's in their backpack, they don't get it turned in. Sometimes they've forgotten. Sometimes they're not comfortable with the work they've done. I think it's helpful with the kids is to talk about what's the goal or focus of that assignment and give them one thing to focus on so that they're not trying to be perfect with everything. Easier said than done. Again, I can say that how they feel is still going to be how they feel. But there's a time, if it's a homework assignment, if it's an art project, if it's a presentation where you do want things to be perfect and not smudged and look a certain way. But then there's other times where math homework doesn't need to look perfect. What's important with math homework is that your teacher can read it and the answer is correct. And so to say today, what I want you to focus on is the answer, not how it looks. So giving them one thing to focus on of, handwriting assignment. Yep, you have beautiful handwriting. You're slow as molasses doing it, but it's beautiful. Today, we're going to take our time and let you have beautiful handwriting. Or on this assignment, it's important to just get it done. So we're going to say 20 minutes. Let's get as far as we can in 20 minutes. And if it's messy or you have to erase or cross out, it's totally okay because that's not what this assignment's about. So trying to give them a single focus and understanding how they feel about it might be different than how you feel about it. It's going to be very real to that child. Acknowledge it. I know you want this to look perfect. We all make mistakes. It's okay to cross things out. And this is what we're going to focus on this particular task or assignment.
That acknowledgement part, I think, is a really helpful tip. I think sometimes parents forget, like, oh, this is the hang up that we're struggling with right now. Let's just name it. Let's call it what it is. And then maybe that can help us move forward. I think that's a great tip. One last sort of common thing. What about if you have a kid that just is not that interested, doesn't really feel like doing it, whatever it is? How do you spark motivation?
Oh, that's a great question. I think, again, from the lens of development, we want to think about motivation in terms of the age and development of the child. So what I mean by that is, for a young child, you can't dangle a carrot and have that gratification be delayed for days and days.
Right.
The young child needs instant gratification. And so for that young child, saying, hey, let's knock this out and then let's go play catch in the backyard. Let's go do that thing that you love to do, that's one-on-one time with me, that's just going to take a couple minutes. So the younger the child is developmentally, the faster I would have that instant gratification. And that instant gratification doesn't need to be a treat. It doesn't need to be stuff. Time is so valuable to our kids. The 13-year-old may disagree. The 13-year-old may not be rewarded or motivated by one-on-one time with their mom. But as the child gets older developmentally, we can start to dangle the carrot a little further. And so for my 13-year-old saying, hey, let's, if we get to bed on time and you've got your lunch packed all week and all the things, why don't you have a friend over for a sleepover Friday night? Giving them something to earn. I love doing natural rewards and natural consequences. Is the natural consequence of showing mature, responsible behavior is you get to go do this fun thing with your friend. If you're not mature and responsible, and then you don't get that fun reward. So the older the child is developmentally, the more you can have them work towards something. And in those in-between ages, visual cues and reminders of, it's great to have a calendar and check things off of, here's, on Wednesday, if we can have a great Monday, Tuesday, you get to choose dinner Wednesday night. Let's put that in front of you as a visual cue and reminder to stay on track. But think about their developmental age for how you're motivating them.
That is a good reminder. And I think sometimes we forget how old our kids are and have high expectations. It's like, well, why aren't you doing the thing I need you to do? And it's like, oh, right. That's where you are. And honoring that is important.
It is.
One last question. I just wanted to talk briefly about sort of common aha moments that parents have. So you've talked a lot about development and that role of development and having like, oh, right, parents, remember development is really important, and knowing where your child is and what's a reasonable expectation and what's not. But could you also talk just a little bit about attention and the difference between sustained attention versus short-term attention?
Yeah, this is such an interesting thing where, just like memory, attention is not one thing. It is a multifaceted, nuanced thing, but we talk about it like one thing, right? He's got great attention, he doesn't have great attention. And one of the comments I'll get from parents all the time is, I don't think it's an intention issue. He can do what he loves for a ton of time, but he can't sit down to do math for 5 minutes. And we don't realize that we have different attentional systems. So we might have a child that has a great attentional system in one area and not in another. So one of the things to keep in mind is one of our attentional systems is what we talk about as a short-term reward-driven attentional system. This is the type of attentional system, the networks and pathways that kick in when we're playing computer games or video games or social media. It's a tiny increment of attention linked with a reward that re-engages that attention. So when your child is playing 2 hours of Fortnite, it is not 2 hours of attention and focus. It is, I can't do quick mental math, which tells you about my brain. It is, thousands of small increments of attention and focus linked together by a reward. That's not the attentional system we need for work and for school. That attentional system is our sustained attention system. Can you continue to stay engaged and focused when there's not a continual reward system? And it's important to keep in mind with our kids that they're going to get better at what they're practicing. So if they're spending a ton of time doing activities that are strengthening their reward-driven pathways, they are going to be continually doing more of those reward-driven things because that's what we're programming their brain to do. So, and we live in an age of technology. There's no get rid of it. That's not realistic. So it's always, how do I find the balance with that? Is how do we minimize the amount of time they're doing that, and then making sure that we're balancing that by strengthening sustained attention pathways. So anything that you're doing that requires you to stay focused, things like reading a book. And there are things that, unfortunately, for our kids that are used to fast things, sometimes sound boring, but it's the reality of life. Books can be wonderful. So it's balancing that. We're not going to get rid of short-term reward-driven things. And those are important attentional systems too. They pique your attention to be really focused. But when we're doing a lot of that, it's also going to fatigue the brain overall. So it's finding that balance every day for our kids so that they're also strengthening those sustained attention networks.
Yeah, that's something to work on.
For all of us, right? We all spend a lot of time on social media and scrolling through news stories.
Right. Well, Dr. Jackson, you are with Brain Balance. So just quickly before I let you go, I'd love you just to speak very briefly about, for those parents out there who don't know what Brain Balance is, what is Brain Balance, and maybe how could that help your child?
Sure. Brain Balance is the nation's leading program as a non-drug program to help strengthen the brain. So we do a ton of work to improve attention and focus and memory, but we're all about optimizing brain function. When we think about how our kids feel and function, it comes back to how our brain is functioning. And an efficient, effective brain is able to pay attention, have impulse control, all these things that develop over time develops through the networks and pathways in our brain. So Brain Balance is able to target target and strengthen those networks and pathways in the brain through all sorts of fun and active and engaging physical and sensory pieces that we layer all together in a comprehensive program for kids and adults as well. And what's great, we do have centers all across the country, but it's also a program that you can do from home. So you don't have to live right by a center. Our home programs are still live coached. So you're still working with a live person through a computer, but doing physical and active and engaging things at home with your brain kit that comes with the program.
Well, it sounds like it's fun, and maybe it could be really helpful if your child is struggling with some of these other things at school or at homework or at home. This could be a great way to maybe move through those challenges a little bit more gracefully.
Absolutely. The brain can change at any age, and that's been an exciting thing in science that's come out over the last 2 decades. So just because there's a struggle doesn't mean it has to remain that way.
Yeah, that's comforting as a parent to know. Well, thank you so much to Dr. Rebecca Jackson from Brain Balance. And thank you also to all of our viewers and listeners today. Make sure that you do visit ChesapeakeFamily.com for up-to-date local information on home, health, and living for today's Maryland parent. This episode will be archived on ChesapeakeFamily.com in both video and podcast format. I'm Janet Jefferson with Chesapeake Family Life and Third Floor Views. Thank you so much.